In the 1960s, speed had no safety net, no electronics, no apologies. Just throttle, tire, and timing. The quarter mile was the truth, and the bikes that ran it best weren't always the biggest or flashiest. They were the fastest where it counted. These are the 15 fastest motorcycles of the 1960s. Number 15, BSA Gold Star DBD 34. It didn't need size or cylinders to make a point. The BSA Gold Star DBD 34 earned its reputation the hard way, by showing up at the strip, getting pointed in a straight line, and launching with a precision most riders didn't expect from a single-cylinder machine. It wasn't built to impress with flash. It impressed with results. By the early 1960s, most manufacturers were shifting toward twins and triples for performance. But BSA held its ground with one of the most refined singles of the era. Under the tank sat an air-cooled 4-stroke engine, displacing 534 cubic centimeters. That number alone didn't raise eyebrows, but the way this engine delivered its power did. With peak output nearing 40 horsepower and torque, approaching 35 pound-feet, the Gold Star didn't just get up to speed, it drove there with authority. Quarter-mile performance wasn't theoretical. Riders who knew how to work the 4-speed gearbox could post times in the low 14-second range, with well-tuned examples sneaking into the high 13-second mark under ideal conditions. That kind of time from a single-cylinder machine in the early 60s wasn't just impressive, it was disruptive, especially when you consider that the Gold Star was a true production motorcycle, not a factory special or stripped-down racer. What made the Gold Star so effective wasn't raw power, it was how everything came together. The bike's weight stayed low, just under 390 pounds, which meant launches were clean and throttle response stayed tight. The long inlet tract and Amal GP carburetor weren't for casual riding, but for straight-line pulls. They delivered consistent fuel flow and sharp throttle transitions. That gave the engine room to breathe, and when it hit its stride, the Gold Star surged with a steady linear push that kept climbing. It didn't dominate with displacement or cylinder count, but the BSA Gold Star DBD 34 didn't need to. Over the quarter mile, it ran with bikes far above its class and often beat them to the line. For a single built in the early part of the decade, that kind of speed wasn't expected, but that's exactly what made it count. Number 14, Velocette Venom Thruxton. It may have looked like an elegant British single, but the Velocette Venom Thruxton had a quiet edge that made it one of the fastest production motorcycles of the 1960s over the quarter mile. With its refined leanness and race-born heart, this machine made speed seem both intentional and inevitable. Under the sculpted tank lay a 4-stroke air-cooled single-cylinder engine displacing 499 cubic centimeters. That sound you hear isn't just a note, it's a high-revving promise. Velocette raised the compression and added a dramatic Amal Grand Prix carburetor through a cutout in the tank, combined with a hand gas flowed head to squeeze out an estimated 41 horsepower at 6,200 revolutions per minute, aided by a close ratio 4-speed gearbox and careful tuning. On the scales, this racer-bred road bike weighed about 390 pounds, giving it a punchy power-to-weight ratio for its time. That, plus exceptionally precise geometry and solid British handling, meant launches were sharp and acceleration felt wired and immediate. It wasn't just about how much power you had, but how cleanly it got turned into motion. When the rubber met the road, the Thruxton didn't just participate in the quarter mile it contended. Real-world performance put its top speed around 110 miles per hour, and in the hands of skilled riders on favorable runs, it could dip into the low 13-second range for the quarter mile. That kind of pace from a single-cylinder, mid-60s production bike wasn't simply fast, it was ahead of the curve. It raced too. Velocette riders saw victories at endurance events like the Thruxton 500 and grabbed the top spot in the Isle of Man production TT in 1967. That wasn't marketing. It was proof the factory's street-legal version could outrun the rest under pressure. The Velocette Venom Thruxton didn't rely on trimming weight or cranking out pounds of torque. It relied on intent, engineering, and finesse. Number 13, Triumph Daytona T100R. There was nothing subtle about the Triumph Daytona T100R, and for good reason, it wasn't made to blend in. It was made to race, to challenge bigger machines, and to do it on public roads. Under the tank sat a 4-stroke air-cooled parallel twin engine, displacing 490 cubic centimeters. Triumph didn't hold back on the racing tweaks. They fitted twin Amal carburetors, a high-compression head, and sharp Q cams that let it rev cleanly to 7,400 revolutions per minute. That tuning pushed output to around 39 horsepower, enough to get the Daytona T100R moving with a wake-making punch. Despite its racing roots, this bike was still a street-legal production machine. It weighed in at about 386 pounds, which combined with its compact twin, made it grafted for clean launches. The sound wasn't an afterthought either. It had that familiar Triumph rumble, tuned tight enough to signal performance before you felt it. On the quarter-mile strip, it stood its ground. Top speed hovered just above 105 miles per hour in period tests, and well-tuned examples consistently posted low to mid-13-second runs. The mix of a rev-happy twin, purposeful gearing, and a stout chassis meant that when the throttle was opened, the Daytona T100R didn't ask, you just held on and pointed it straight. It wasn't just about drag strip numbers. The Daytona name was bred from Triumph's wins at the Daytona race, and those roots showed in real-world results. The bike carried that spirit, quick, willing, and unignorable. It wasn't the biggest engine, but it wouldn't be overlooked at the lights. The Triumph Daytona T100R didn't dominate with brute force. It dominated with intent, with engineering tuned for speed, and with the kind of character that made riders lean forward and stop worrying about second gear. That's how it earned its place as one of the fastest motorcycles of its decade. If you think those were fast, wait until you see what's next. The real legends of the strip are still ahead. Hit like, subscribe, and stick around. The next bikes will change how you see quarter-mile speed forever. Number 12, Honda CB450 Black Bomber. It didn't come from England, and it didn't follow the rules. The Honda CB450 Black Bomber rolled into the 1960s with one goal: prove that Japan could build not just reliable motorcycles, but fast ones. And over the quarter mile, that point was made quickly. At its heart was a parallel twin engine that made the British press nervous and its rivals uncomfortable. This was a 4-stroke air-cooled motor, displacing 444 cubic centimeters. But what really turned heads was the twin overhead camshaft layout, a first in a mass-produced motorcycle of its size. That setup let it rev high and breathe easy, with a red line that stretched past 9,000 revolutions per minute. The engine produced around 45 horsepower, with torque peaking near 28 pound-feet. That might not sound aggressive by today's standards, but back then, it was a serious figure for a sub-500 class road bike, especially one that could run past 102 miles per hour and still feel like it had more to give. Quarter-mile numbers told the same story. The CB450 consistently posted runs in the low to mid 14-second range. With a good launch and ideal gearing, some riders squeezed out times just above 14 seconds flat. That kind of performance put it shoulder to shoulder with British twins that had more displacement and more years in the game. Weight stayed manageable at around 412 pounds dry, and the chassis was better sorted than many expected. Suspension was simple but responsive, and the 4-speed transmission clicked cleanly through gears without hesitation. The power delivery was smooth but urgent, and the throttle didn't ask for finesse, it rewarded it. Where other bikes of the time surged or hesitated under throttle, the Black Bomber responded with a steady, rising pull. The twin-carb setup helped, but so did the overall engine balance. Nothing felt stressed, and nothing felt vague. The power was always there, waiting. The Honda CB450 Black Bomber wasn't just a statement, it was a shift in direction. It showed that performance didn't need to rumble or leak or weigh 500 pounds. It just needed to run hard. And this one did, quarter mile after quarter mile. Number 11, BSA A65R Rocket. It didn't wear its speed on the surface. The BSA A65R Rocket looked every bit the classic British twin, with upright lines and polished cases, but the way it moved told a different story. This was BSA's attempt to stay ahead of the rising demand for real road performance, and they didn't miss the mark. At the heart of the Rocket was a parallel twin engine built for efficiency and thrust. Displacement landed at 654 cubic centimeters, and while the basic layout remained familiar, the tuning was sharper than anything BSA had done before. Higher compression, twin carburetors, and a reworked head allowed the engine to rev cleanly into its upper range, producing around 49 horsepower, near 7,000 revolutions per minute. What mattered more was how early the torque arrived and how long it stuck around. This wasn't a twitchy or temperamental machine. It launched with stability, carried weight near 396 pounds dry, and made good use of it. The 4-speed transmission worked smoothly with the power band, and gear spacing kept the engine where it needed to be during hard runs. On the quarter mile, it could consistently post times in the mid 14-second range, which was fast enough to put it ahead of other British twins in its class. BSA also focused on keeping the power under control. The chassis remained simple but solid, and the riding position gave enough leverage to keep the bike steady when things started to move quickly. Top speed landed just above 108 miles per hour. But what gave the rocket its edge was how little drama it took to get there. Even when pushed hard, the rocket didn't fall apart. The engine stayed smooth through each gear, the exhaust notes stayed honest, and the torque kept pulling through the mid-range. It didn't need surprise or spectacle to move fast, it just needed a clean stretch of pavement and a willing rider. The BSAA 65R rocket wasn't built to make noise. It was built to run, and in the mid-60s, that was exactly what set it apart. Number 10. Dunstall 750 Norton. In the 1960s, most production motorcycles came with limits, mechanical ceilings that kept road-going machines from touching true racing performance. The Dunstall 750 Norton was built to erase those limits. It wasn't born in a factory assembly line. It was shaped by Paul Dunstall's obsession with speed, and the result was one of the quickest quarter-mile machines of its decade. Starting with a Norton Atlas base, Dunstall re-engineered nearly everything that mattered. The air-cooled parallel twin still displaced 745 cubic centimeters, but inside, the internals told a different story. Higher compression, reshaped combustion chambers, stronger valve springs, and more aggressive cams transformed the engine's character completely. Twin AMOL monoblock carburetors and a custom exhaust system with equal-length headers gave it the breathing it needed to stay alive at high revs, and more importantly, to launch hard when the flag dropped. The engine now delivered close to 68 horsepower, but what stood out was how confidently that power came on. Unlike many high-strung twins of the era, the Dunstall didn't rely on sudden spikes. It pulled from the mid-range with a strong, flat torque curve that made it feel composed under full acceleration. With a dry weight of roughly 390 pounds, it didn't need excess, it needed balance. And that balance translated into real results. Quarter-mile testing didn't just suggest performance, it confirmed it. In period tests, the Dunstall 750 Norton posted times that pushed into the low 13-second range, with some tuned examples breaking that barrier altogether. That placed it not just ahead of its British competition, but directly into territory occupied by only the quickest production machines of the time. Its top speed tested at 131 miles per hour, backed up what the stopwatch already proved. But the track wasn't its only proving ground. When Ray Pickrell rode a Dunstall Norton in the 1968 Isle of Man production TT, he averaged more than 98 miles per hour on public roads, using the same power plant any buyer could order. That wasn't a race-tuned special. It was a production bike, set up for speed. At a time when most manufacturers were still catching up to the idea of performance tuning, the Dunstall 750 Norton had already crossed the line. Number 9. Kawasaki 500 Mach 3. Built with acceleration in mind, it was a purpose-driven machine that turned the quarter mile into its proving ground. At a time when most street bikes climbed speed gradually, the Mach 3 delivered its numbers in a flash and made sure everyone noticed. Kawasaki took a different route than most competitors. Instead of chasing high displacement, they focused on power to weight. The engine was a two-stroke, air-cooled triple-cylinder, displacing 499 cubic centimeters. Unlike the heavier British twins or broader Japanese fours, this engine was compact and rev-happy, producing peak power near 60 horsepower at 7,500 revolutions per minute. What made the Mach 3 truly stand out wasn't just the power, it was how quickly that power arrived. The torque curve didn't build gradually. It came on like a switch, delivering close to 42 pound-feet without delay. That sudden punch, combined with a dry weight of just 384 pounds, gave the bike one of the most explosive launches of the decade. On paper, Kawasaki claimed a quarter-mile time of 12.4 seconds, and while production models usually landed closer to 13.1, the result was still remarkable. With proper tuning and ideal conditions, some riders edged into the high 12s. Top speed reached 124 miles per hour, but it was the distance between 0 and that top end that set the Mach 3 apart. Handling was secondary. The chassis was light, the suspension was basic, and the short wheelbase made high-speed stability a challenge. But in a straight line, few bikes could keep up. The narrow power band demanded skill, and the front wheel lifted easily under throttle. But for riders focused on the strip, those quirks became part of the experience. The Kawasaki 500 Mach 3 didn't pretend to be refined. It was built for one thing, straight-line speed, and it delivered it better than almost anything else on the road. In the context of the quarter mile, it was not just fast for its size. It was fast, period. Number 8. Norton Dominator 650 SS. Some motorcycles made their mark with displacement. Others did it with technology. The Norton Dominator 650 SS made its name through balance, power, weight, and frame geometry, working together to produce real-world speed where it counted most, the quarter mile. The engine was a vertical twin with decades of refinement behind it. Norton took their proven four-stroke, air-cooled layout and gave it a sharper edge. Displacement came out to 646 cubic centimeters. But what elevated the SS version wasn't just the size, it was the way it breathed. A set of twin Amal monoblock carburetors fed the mixture, while polished ports and a performance camshaft helped it rev freer and pull harder. Power output hovered near 49 horsepower at around 6,800 revolutions per minute, which put it squarely in line with the top British twins of its day. On paper, it didn't overwhelm, but on the road, the 650 SS knew how to apply what it had. The bike's dry weight stayed close to 410 pounds, and the Norton featherbed frame, already legendary, kept everything composed under load. The 4-speed transmission delivered clean, deliberate shifts, keeping the engine in its torque range without wasting time between gears. And it was the torque that made the difference. With usable pull arriving early and holding steady through the mid-range, the Dominator launched off the line with minimal drama. In quarter-mile testing, it consistently posted times in the low 14-second range, edging out larger bikes that struggled to keep their power in check. Top speed ran just above 110 miles per hour. But what mattered more was how quickly it got there. It also didn't fall apart when pushed. The chassis stayed flat, the handling remained neutral, and the ride never felt overwhelmed by the engine. That stability gave riders confidence to stay wide open through all 4 gears, something not every performance bike of the era could claim. The Norton Dominator 650 SS wasn't a machine that relied on brute strength or novelty. It relied on tight execution. Number 7. Yamaha YR1. By the time the 1960s were halfway through, most Japanese motorcycles were still playing catch-up. But then came the Yamaha YR1. Small on paper, quick on the strip, and suddenly everyone was watching their mirrors. The YR1 was Yamaha's first serious shot at the 350 cubic centimeter class. And instead of mimicking the British 4-strokes, they went the opposite route. What powered this machine was a piston port, 2-stroke, parallel twin engine that displaced 348 cubic centimeters. Lightweight internals, chrome-lined cylinders, and a sky-high redline gave it a completely different character, one tuned for revs, not grunts. Output figures landed at around 36 horsepower at 7,500 revolutions per minute. But it wasn't just about the number, it was about the way that power showed up. The torque curve was narrow, but once it hit the band, the YR1 didn't hesitate. Weighing in at just under 346 pounds, it had no trouble getting off the line. And once the needle swept past 6,000, the YR1 surged ahead with a sharpness few 4-strokes could match. Quarter-mile runs in the mid to low 14-second range were common, depending on rider weight and conditions. That put it right up against much larger twins. And in the hands of a skilled rider, it could even pull ahead through the gears. The 5-speed transmission kept the motor right in its sweet spot, with tight ratios and short throws, making each shift feel like an extension of the throttle rather than a delay. Handling was equally sharp. The frame was narrow and well-balanced, and though the suspension was basic, the overall geometry worked. What mattered most was that it never felt vague or floaty at high speed. You pointed it, and it held the line. What made the YR1 especially dangerous at the drag strip was that it didn't look threatening. Riders underestimated it constantly until it launched. Even British twins had a hard time pulling away once it was wound up, and more than a few Triumphs and Nortons found themselves playing catch-up before the line. The Yamaha YR1 didn't win with size or weight. It won by using every inch of what it had. Fast, aggressive, and far ahead of its time, it proved that Yamaha wasn't just here to compete, they were here to take over. Number 6. Honda CB77 Superhawk. When Honda brought the CB77 Superhawk to American shores, it didn't just challenge the status quo, it cracked it wide open. This wasn't a thumper dressed in chrome or rebadged European design. It was a precision-built twin that could scream, rev, and run a quarter mile with a rhythm British bikes simply couldn't match. The Superhawk wasn't big, but it didn't need to be. A twin-cylinder, overhead cam engine displaced just over 305 cubic centimeters, but the layout was aggressive. Dual carburetors, a roller-bearing crankshaft, and a redline north of 9,000 revolutions per minute gave it character few four-strokes could touch in the early 60s. It didn't pull like a tractor. It surged like a machine built for speed. It made around 28 horsepower. But the Superhawk's real strength was how it used that output. The 5-speed gearbox was crisp, the ratios were tight, and the power band was right where it needed to be. Riders who kept the revs up were rewarded with consistent acceleration and a top-end punch that lasted far longer than most singles could manage. It didn't stumble or wheeze at high speed, it thrived there. Quarter-mile times for the CB77 routinely landed in the 15-second range, putting it right alongside and sometimes ahead of larger British twins that made more noise than progress. Its top speed sat just under 100 miles per hour, but it got there with urgency, especially from a dead stop. Weight sat around 350 pounds, giving it enough mass for stability, but not enough to dull its reflexes. Riders noticed. Racers started modifying them. And soon, the Superhawk was more than just a reliable commuter. It was a quarter-mile threat hiding behind turn signals and Honda badges. It didn't wobble, it didn't vibrate to pieces, and it didn't blow gaskets under stress. It just ran, again and again. What separated the CB77 from the rest wasn't brute force. It was refinement, revs, and the kind of mechanical precision that made each gear change feel like clockwork. Over the quarter mile, that meant fewer mistakes, more consistency, and a surprising number of victories against supposedly faster bikes. Number 5, Norton Manxman. The Norton Manxman, though often overshadowed by its racier cousins, was one of the fastest factory-built Nortons ever shipped across the Atlantic. Built specifically for the US market, it blended high-output performance with just enough civility to wear a license plate. Unlike the older Dominator twins, the Manxman didn't play conservative with power. Its vertical twin engine was bored out to 646 cubic centimeters, and Norton gave it more than just displacement. Higher compression twin amol, monoblock carburetors, and stronger internals helped raise output to around 52 horsepower at 6,800 revolutions per minute. But it was the mid-range where it truly surprised riders. The torque didn't hit hard, but it held on for far longer than most British twins in its class, especially through second and third gear. Weighing in at just under 435 pounds, the Manxman carried its size with grace. The featherbed frame, already proven on race circuits, offered excellent weight distribution and poise under acceleration. Launching hard from a stop, the Manxman had just enough front-end lift to feel lively, but stayed controlled enough to stay planted. It was a rare combination of punch and polish. Quarter-mile times for the Manxman consistently came in around 13 and 9/10 seconds, and some stripped-down examples clocked low 13s when conditions were right. That wasn't just respectable. It was enough to run alongside high-performance four-strokes from bigger brands and bigger names. Top speed stretched past 120 miles per hour, but what made it quarter-mile fast was how quickly it got there. Even with the twin-shock rear and drum brakes, the Manxman stayed predictable at high speed. The gearing was short enough for quick starts, yet tall enough in fourth to carry momentum well past the traps. It didn't rely on trick components or radical geometry, it just worked because everything was built to do its job without hesitation. The Norton Manxman may not be the name most riders think of when they picture speed in the 60s, but on a drag strip, it didn't need an introduction. It only needed 13 seconds and a clear lane to show where it stood. Number 4, Yamaha X S1650. Yamaha intended the XS1650 to rewrite expectations, and when it hit the line, that's exactly what it did. This wasn't a subtle entry, it was a challenge. A fully developed four-stroke twin, built for torque and balance, yet fast enough to demand respect on the quarter mile. The engine layout pushed boundaries. A single overhead cam, air-cooled parallel twin, displacing 653 cubic centimeters. Yamaha didn't just ride the displacement wave, they engineered the core. Lightweight components, horizontal crankcase split, and dual Mikuni BS38 carburetors fed fuel with clarity. Output landed right around 53 horsepower at 7,200 revolutions per minute, while torque clocked near 40 pound-feet at 6,000 revolutions per minute. That power band shaped a bike that didn't need top-end theatrics to feel fast. Its punch was steady and confident. At roughly 409 pounds dry, the XS1 carried mass with purpose rather than plastering it on. The frame held steady under throttle, and shift transitions felt seamless, keeping the engine in its sweet spot longer than most of its competitors could manage. From the lights, it didn't rock or rush, it just launched, Quarter-mile results reflected that composure. Estimated runs landed in the mid-14-second range, with top speeds edging into the low 100s. Real numbers, not marketing figures. On the street, under a skilled hand, those times translated into meaningful performance. It was not explosive, but rather steady, repeatable, and always accurate. What set the Yamaha apart wasn't raw aggression, though it had that too. It was how it delivered speed. The twin carried its thrust cleanly through the gears, never faltering. That made the quarter mile feel less frantic and more focused, like a machine designed to meet speed on equal terms. Even in endurance heats, the XS1 held its own. Reliability wasn't a bonus, it was the point. Riders could rely on smooth acceleration, predictable response, and a flywheel that didn't fight revival after a run. That steadiness meant fewer errors, better launches, and more consistent times, all essential when counting quarters and fractions of a second. The Yamaha XS1650 didn't conquer the strip with flash. It did it with finesse. In a decade full of two-stokes and racing legends, it quietly proved that a properly balanced four-stroke twin could still hold its own. Number 3, Harley-Davidson XLCH Sportster. Some bikes were built for cruising and others were built for competition, but the Harley-Davidson XLCH Sportster managed to cross both worlds, especially when the quarter mile lit up. By the mid-60s, this stripped-down Sportster was earning a reputation as the king of the drags, and it wore that title with a purposeful growl. At the core was a rugged four-stroke, 45-degree V-twin with overhead valves, displacing 883 cubic centimeters. It wasn't shy about its American roots. With high compression heads, a magneto ignition sometimes added for off-road racing, and a solo hoop tail that cut weight, it took a relatively heavy bike and made it feel lean where it counted. Output reached around 55 horsepower, but more importantly, that torque came in heavy and early, pushing the Sportster off the line with a weapon's accuracy. Tipping the scales at roughly 452 pounds fully fueled, it wasn't the lightest option on the list. Yet, it swallowed that mass under acceleration. The Sportster punched into the high 13-second quarter-mile zone, and with a sharp setup and clean launch, some riders cracked low 13-second passes. That kind of performance put it shoulder to shoulder with lighter British rivals, and out of reach for many of them too. Handling wasn't ignored either. The Sportster's frame was narrow and rigid. Front forks were robust. The throttle response sharp enough to tease front-end lifts without losing control. It didn't corner like a nimble cafe racer, but in a drag race, you don't need cornering. You need launch authority, gear leverage, an engine that won't quit. The XLCH had every one of those nailed. The Harley-Davidson XLCH Sportster didn't pretend to belong on a drag strip. It proved it. When the lights dropped and every second mattered, it didn't just run hard, it ruled that space. Number 2, Triumph T120R, Bonneville 650. By the late 1960s, the Triumph Bonneville name was already well known, but the T120R version made it a serious threat on the drag strip. Built with higher compression pistons and twin Amal carburetors, feeding its parallel twin engine, it had the kind of immediate throttle response that could make or break a quarter-mile run. With 650 cubic centimeters of displacement, it produced enough torque to pull hard from the line without bogging, a key advantage when reaction times mattered as much as outright horsepower. From a standing start, the T120R launched with a smooth but urgent surge, helped by a relatively low weight that allowed the rear tire to hook up instead of spinning. Riders could consistently post times in the high 13-second range, with trap speeds just over 100 miles per hour. In an era when many street bikes struggled to break into the 14s, that was enough to put it among the fastest production motorcycles you could buy. Its 4-speed gearbox was geared perfectly for drag use, keeping the motor right in its power band on each shift. The torque delivery, measured at around 38 pound-feet, came in low enough to make the bike feel strong off the line, but carried well through the mid-range. This balance meant you didn't need to ring it to the red line to get a competitive run, a critical trait for repeatable performance. Against American V-twins and newer Japanese multis, the Triumph's edge came from its ability to accelerate cleanly in the first half of the strip. Those crucial opening 60 feet often determined the race. In the competitive world of 1960s quarter-mile racing, the Triumph T120R Bonneville 650 stood out for its ability to combine usable power, lightweight, and precise gearing. It wasn't just quick for its class. It was one of the few bikes of the decade that could back up its reputation. run after run. Number 1. Suzuki T500 Titan. It didn't just challenge expectations, it rewrote them. In the late 1960s, the Suzuki T500 Titan arrived with a compact, high RPM, two-stroke twin that cut through the quarter mile with surprising confidence. Consider it the sleeper of the lineup, understated in presentation, but quick enough to dominate the stopwatch. What powered this machine was a balanced two-stroke, air-cooled parallel twin displacing 492 cubic centimeters. Suzuki went all in on efficiency and reliability, over-engineering the bottom end to withstand high rev use and long pulls. Claimed output sat around 47 horsepower at 7,000 revolutions per minute, yet its strength lay in how cleanly it delivered performance, not just peak numbers. The torque arrived early and built sharply, giving the Titan a launch that felt punchier than its horsepower figure suggested. At roughly 410 pounds wet, the bike wasn't the lightest, but its power-to-weight ratio translated into real-world acceleration. With a crisp 5-speed gearbox keeping the engine in its power band, riders often found themselves in the mid-13-second quarter-mile zone, straight from the showroom. Trap speeds consistently broke into the low 100-mile-per-hour range, real, repeatable results that backed up the hype. What set the T500 apart wasn't raw top speed, it was capability. Unlike many two-strokes of the era that were prone to overheating or abrupt power bands, the Titan stayed composed, even when pushed hard down the strip. That smooth delivery helped transfer power to the tire with far fewer wheel spin hiccups than its rivals. Big hits, fast starts, consistent runs, that was the Titan's game. Racing didn't ignore it either. Production-based Titan variants powered riders to real results at club drags and local TT events. Its reliability, combined with tunable breathing and solid parts, made it a favorite among grassroots racers. It wasn't a question of if the Titan could go fast. It was about how hard it could be ridden, again and again, without falling apart. When the stopwatch lit up, it didn't just show numbers, it told a story. The T500 Titan was a production machine that didn't just survive the quarter mile, it thrived. It showed that thoughtful engineering, two-stroke punch, and a balanced chassis could beat assumptions and beat them reliably. These weren't just motorcycles, they were 60s icons that ruled the quarter mile and rewrote the record books. Think we missed one? Let us know in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more.